That spring dinner night, right in the middle of Bend Community Lodge with 32 people watching, my daughter-in-law threw an entire glass of Oregon Pinot Noir straight into my face. The glass exploded like a stone hitting a truck windshield, red wine mixing with my blood as it ran down my collar. And in the moment, everyone shot to their feet, chairs screeching across the wooden floor like metal on steel. My son stood perfectly still, not running to me, not asking a single question, just staring with an emptiness that cut deeper than the glass itself. And that was the moment I understood a truth no father ever wants to accept. Sometimes the person trying to erase you carries your last name. If you've ever seen an elder publicly humiliated, ever watched a parent treated like dead weight, leave it. So I know you're here, and you still believe in fairness. Tell me where you're hearing this opening from. Bend, Portland, Boise, or somewhere else entirely. And if you believe that sometimes silence is the strongest form of resistance, hit follow. I appreciate your presence, even if you only paused here for a few seconds. My name is Harold Mercer, 68 years old. This is my 5th year living alone in the little wood cabin on the edge of Bend, Oregon, ever since Martha, my wife, took her last breath in the armchair by the fireplace. People say that after 5 years the grief fades. They lie. It doesn't fade. It just changes color, from sharp to quiet, from sobbing to long, empty pauses between sips of coffee. I had just begun to grow used to those empty spaces when my son called. Wednesday afternoon, Bend had that pale kind of sunlight, Martha always said, makes you miss home. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through old audit files just to keep my hands busy, a habit I never shook even 10 years after retirement, when the phone lit up with 2 words, Daniel Mercer. How long had it been since he last called? 6 months? A year? It took 2 rings for me to even remember this ringtone was set specifically for him. I picked up. Hello? Dad, are you free? Daniel's voice was strange, not the rushed, busy tone he always had, not the tired grumbling after work. It was tight, but smooth, as if someone had rehearsed the lines for him. 40 years in financial investigations taught me one thing. It's not just account balances that lie. Voices do too. I'm home. At my age, there aren't many other places to be, I said, trying to keep my voice light. He gave a stiff little laugh. Dad, listen, I know it's late notice, but this week is Easter. Vanessa and I were thinking, if you're okay with it, we could do Easter dinner. My pen froze. My mind didn't catch the word Easter. It caught on we. We, as in me and me, or whatever crowd he'd pulled his life into now. You want me to come down to Portland? I asked. No. Daniel cleared his throat. We were thinking, if possible, we'd host it in Bend, at your place. You know the Bend Community Lodge by the Deschutes River? I remember you taking me there when I was a kid. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window. Across the yard, under the shade of the old pine trees, was Bend Community Lodge. Dark timber roof, red brick steps, big windows that always glowed warm at night. That place, these days it's mostly used for veterans gatherings, small weddings, or the occasional town council meeting. I still have a discounted lodge rental code because I once worked as a security consultant for the town. Daniel remembers that, but Vanessa, his wife, has never mentioned the lodge with anything other than boredom. Why Bend? I asked slowly. Vanessa always says this place is too remote, nothing but trees and snow. There was a pause on the line, one single breath. Very short, but enough for someone who listens carefully. And I always listen. My whole career was built on hearing the silence between numbers. Well, this year's different, Dad, Daniel continued, forcing brightness into his voice. Vanessa thinks it's been 5 years since Mom passed. Maybe you should have more people around, and you don't want to eat Easter alone again. It made sense. Perfect sense. So perfect. It felt unnatural. I rolled the pen between my fingers. Martha used to say, "Stop treating everything like an investigation. Home isn't always a crime scene." I believed her then, now a little less. I glanced at the picture of Martha and me hanging on the wall, taken right under the wooden nameplate of Bend Community Lodge on its opening day in 1993. I remember that day clearly. Our laughter blurred one corner of the photo. "Who suggested Bend Lodge?" I asked, staying neutral. "Vanessa or the Hales?" Silence stretched longer this time, long enough for me to hear Daniel swallow. "You're sharp as a blade, Dad," he tried to joke. "Vanessa and I talked, and we thought maybe we'd invite her parents too. Grant and Lorraine. They've wanted to see where you live." Of course they have. Fathers have their own intuition, different from professional instinct, but chilling in the same way. The Hale family, Grant and Lorraine, are the type who only care about things they can sell, lease, or use as collateral. They live in Lake Oswego, drive shiny SUVs, vacation in Mexico twice a year, yet quietly filed for bankruptcy in Nevada last year to dodge debt. I know, not because I'm nosy, but because when my son ties his life to someone, I investigate. Not to control him, but to be ready when the worst happens. "How many people?" I asked. Just family, Dad. Me, Vanessa, little Lily, Grant and Lorraine, a few of Vanessa's friends in Bend. About 30 people?" 32, I said automatically. That number fits the round tables. Nicely. Daniel laughed, this time genuinely. "See, I knew you'd have it all figured out. So, can we borrow your name to book the lodge? We'll handle decorations and catering. You just come. Sit, eat, enjoy." People who say "just come and eat" are usually the same people who only need one signature from you to change the rest of your life. And I knew I was standing exactly there. "All right," I said. "I'll come. Call the lodge and put it under Harold Mercer. They'll know." "Dad," Daniel's voice softened, "we really want to do something for you, especially Vanessa. She said you seem lonely lately." That almost made me laugh. Vanessa, the woman who wrinkled her nose at the smell of damp pine in my cabin and called Martha's armchair retirement home furniture, is suddenly concerned about my loneliness. I didn't say it. Some things work better in silence. Silence becomes evidence. After we hung up, I sat a while listening to the wind through the pines, carrying the scent of old snow and wet earth. Bend is quiet in a way that tricks people into thinking nothing happens here. But I've lived long enough to know the worst things always begin with a fun family dinner. I stood and went to the small office behind the kitchen, maps on the walls, shelves of files, 2 monitors, and an old black corded phone. On the ceiling, others would see a speck. I know exactly what it is. 15 years ago, when I was head of internal investigations for a financial firm in Portland, I worked with Deschutes Security Systems, installing pinhole cameras to catch an internal fraud ring. When I retired, they installed a simple system in my home as a thank you. I accepted, thought it was amusing then. Not now. And because I once consulted for the town, the council allowed me to keep a lightweight monitoring system in the lodge for crowd events. The cameras look like dust specks. Nobody notices. I checked the monitor. 4 feeds, my house, the yard, the lodge entrance, and the lodge interior. Nothing but melting snow and 2 deer wandering the tree line. I replayed Daniel's final words. "We just don't want you eating Easter alone." If I hadn't read 186 elder financial abuse case files, maybe I'd believe him. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I know by heart. "Lowell speaking," a deep, smoke-rough voice answered. "Marcus, it's Harold," I said. No small talk. "You free?" "For you? Always," he chuckled. "Is this about the foundation or the grandkids?" "My son," I said, "and the people he's bringing." Another pause. "I'm guessing this has to do with his wife and the Hales." "Correct. They want Easter dinner at Bend Community Lodge. 32 people, under my name." "It's been a while since they volunteered to do anything in Bend," Marcus mused. "Vanessa hates that place like the plague." That's why I'm calling. Daniel is weak. Vanessa isn't. The Hale's even less. People like them don't waste time on a place unless they plan to take something from it. Marcus clicked his pen. That meant he was working. Your Deschutes system still maintained? They ran diagnostics last week. Everything online, encrypted, backed up to the cloud, and mirrored to my office drive. I paused, then said each word slowly. Marcus, they're about to generate their own evidence. Marcus let out a short, satisfied laugh. You old bastard, he said. He said, you're setting a trap again. I'm not setting a trap, I corrected him. I'm just pulling the light toward the exact spot it needs to shine on. Whoever steps into it, that's their choice. All right, Marcus replied. Then let them play. I'll start preparing. Protective order templates, evidence checklists, and a few old contacts at the Deschutes County Courthouse. And remember, no matter what happens that night, do not lose your temper. Old men looking angry on camera play terribly with a jury. I know, I said, eyes fixed on the empty feed from Bend Community Lodge. I've spent my whole career teaching people not to react emotionally on camera. We hung up. I stayed in the room alone. Outside, the sky slipped toward dusk. The exterior lights of Bend Community Lodge flicked on, warm yellow bulbs strung along the porch, casting soft halos across patches of grass still wet from melting snow. I maximized the lodge feed to full screen. Inside, it was still empty. Chairs stacked, round tables leaning against the wall, beige curtains half drawn. Only one thing was alive, a tiny red dot glowing in the upper corner, signaling the system was recording. For the first time in a long while, the emptiness inside me wasn't the only thing I felt. Something else had crept in. The quiet focus of a man who once hunted, now sitting still, waiting for the animal to wander into the open on its own. This Easter I wouldn't be eating alone, but not because Daniel cared the way he claimed. It would be because predators always think the prey has grown too weak, too dim-witted to embed cameras in its own den. They would learn they were wrong, just not immediately. If you've never stepped into Bend Community Lodge on an Easter afternoon, it's hard to imagine how its warm golden light can make everything look peaceful enough to fool even a man who's read more than 186 elder abuse case files, as I have. Inside, 32 people were laughing, talking, raising glasses, and taking photos in front of the tulip wreath and the Happy Easter 2025 backdrop. The buffet tables stretched long with cold cuts, toasted bread, local cheeses, and the faint scent of Willamette Valley. White wine drifting like a soft mist across the room. I stepped into the lodge just as the small string ensemble in the corner started playing Morning Has Broken. I have to admit, if I weren't familiar with the kind of atmosphere Martha used to call beautiful in a dishonest way, I might have believed tonight was nothing more than a normal family gathering. But it wasn't. The moment I saw Vanessa's eyes, I knew everything had begun. She stood beside the dessert table, Prosecco in hand, pastel pink dress, makeup flawless. She scanned the lodge like someone appraising property value, not with surprise or delight, but with the quiet calculation of a person measuring how much this place might sell for in the Bend market. When I walked in, Vanessa smiled the same smile I'd seen in countless internal reports, the smile of someone ready to lie until her last breath. Dad's here, Daniel said, walking quickly toward me. He gave me a half-second hug, no longer. How do you like it? Vanessa and I did the decorations. Good? Good, I said. Fitting for tonight. Daniel forced a laugh. He never lied like his wife. I moved slowly across the room, greeting old neighbors, a few veterans, and several of Vanessa's friends I'd never met, then sat at a table near the window, overlooking the Deschutes River. Under the table, I pressed a small button on my black Parker pen. The micro recorder inside clicked on. An old habit. Not because I wanted to spy on family, but because experience taught me this. When people think they're safe and supported, they tell the truth more freely. I'd barely set the pen down on the napkin when Vanessa spoke, loud enough for the entire adjacent table to hear. Honestly, Harold, I still don't understand why you insist on staying in that cabin. It looks like a nursing home. Conversations around us paused for half a beat. I turned my head. Vanessa twirled her glass as if she'd accidentally blurted something out, but her eyes, cold and calculating, said nothing about it was accidental. Grant Hale, Lorraine's husband and Daniel's father-in-law, set his plate down and leaned forward, with both palms on the table, raising his voice so 3 nearby tables turned their heads. Let me be honest, Harold. At your age, an assisted living facility makes perfect sense. You'd have care company. Living alone in that cabin is dangerous. The room froze. Music kept playing, but nobody was listening anymore. I felt more than 20 heads turn toward me at once. A 68-year-old man had just been told he should be in a nursing home, in public, openly, deliberately. I didn't react. No raised eyebrows, no defensiveness. I simply rested my hand on the pen so the recorder caught every word. Across from me, Daniel swallowed hard. He looked at me, then at his wife, then at his father-in-law. He stammered, Dad, don't take it the wrong way. We worry about you. But his words fell flat because Vanessa cut in first. Just think about it. Alone all day. We're all worried. Daniel said you forgot to turn off the stove twice last week. That's dangerous. I turned to Daniel. He avoided my eyes. I remember very clearly that I didn't touch the stove last week except to boil morning tea. Daniel, I asked, when did I forget to turn off the stove? He flushed. I heard it from Vanessa. Good. Another puzzle piece falling into place. Lorraine stepped in suddenly, voice soft with fake sympathy. Harold, we mean well. At your age, having someone manage finances, medications, that's helpful. That was a soft hit. The next one wasn't. Grant rested a heavy hand on Daniel's shoulder and said loudly, for everyone to hear, Son, you have to be strong. Your father's reached the point where he can't manage things anymore. The house is too big, too dangerous. You need to think about taking over for him. And that's when I saw it. The truth, not a coincidence. A plan, structured, rehearsed, timed, and assigned like a stage production. Vanessa is giving signals. Lorraine is pretending to wipe her mouth to hide a smile. Grant presses on Daniel's guilt to push him into the hero son saving his helpless father role. For anyone else, this would have been a flawless manipulation. But I am Harold Mercer, and I've read this exact dialogue from dozens of abusers trying to seize control of an elder's assets. No one in the room knew every word was being recorded by the pen. No one knew the Deschutes security cameras overhead were tagging each face and time-stamping each sentence as they publicly humiliated me in front of 32 people. Daniel was still mumbling something like, Dad, don't be upset. Vanessa's just worried. But I wasn't listening anymore. I was watching the small behaviors, the things I'd studied for 40 years, the hidden looks, the hand signals, the tiny shoulder shrugs Vanessa used to cue Daniel. I pretended to check my email on my phone, but I was actually opening the live feed from the ceiling camera right above Vanessa. From my angle, the Zoom feed showed the name of the person she was texting, Dr. Neil Crawford. I knew that name. Not a normal doctor. A man suspected, though never convicted, in 2 guardianship fraud cases in Portland, falsifying incapacity evaluations, pushing elders into facilities, letting their children seize assets, and Vanessa had been messaging him nonstop. I didn't get angry. I just felt confirmation. Later that night, after everyone left, I stayed in the lodge alone under the dim porch lights. I looked up at the tiny bean-sized camera blinking in the corner. That little red dot told me one thing. The real game had finally begun. And this time, I wasn't the prey. I was the observer, and I knew one truth very well. Only people who don't know the cameras are on speak this honestly. I've always believed there are rooms in a person's life that, if opened at the right moment, save you. Opened at the wrong moment, they bury you. The room behind my kitchen belonged to the first kind, a space no bigger than a storage closet. Yet inside it held things that, if I ever spoke about them, most people would think I was still haunted by my old job. Truth is, I'm just careful. That afternoon, after the Easter gathering filled with those probing stares at Bend Community Lodge, I came home, hung my coat on the hook, and walked into the kitchen. Everything in that pine wood kitchen looked exactly the same as it did 5 years ago when Martha was alive. The pale blue cloth on the table, the old brass kettle she loved, the small vase still holding a few dried lavender stems. I ran my fingers along the cloth, not to straighten it, but to reassure myself that I still controlled at least one part of my life. I walked to the corner of the kitchen where an old wooden cabinet stood, the one Martha bought from a thrift store. Anyone else would think it was just for pots and pans, but like Martha used to say, you hide the important things in the places nobody would think to look. She had no idea how right she was. I pulled the second drawer gently, pressed the little metal latch installed on the inside. A soft click sounded. The wall behind the cabinet shifted slightly, opening a narrow gap that revealed a thin steel door, painted to match the wood. A room never meant to be accidentally discovered. I slipped inside and flipped the switch. Warm yellow light filled the space, no more than 10 square meters, with a desk, 2 shelves, and a medium-sized safe. The faint scent of old paper and printer ink drifted in the air. The smell I lived with for 40 years doing work Daniel always thought was uninspiring. I opened the first shelf. Files sat sorted in a color-coded system, a habit from my years leading internal investigations. Seeing them reminded me I wasn't nearly as old as Grant Hale claimed. I was simply experienced enough not to speak unnecessarily. I pulled out a black file with a white label. Case 14B, the Thornton guardianship fraud. I opened it. On top was a blurry black and white photo of Arthur Thornton, 78, eyes cloudy but gentle. His son, Victor Thornton, had forged medical documents, pressured a doctor to sign an incapacity report, and shoved his father into a cheap facility while transferring all of the man's assets into his own name in just 8 days. I remembered clearly the day I discovered he'd been drugging his father with triple doses of sleeping medication. Not enough to kill him, but enough to make the old man confused, rambling, just enough to justify tossing him into a care home. The court later called it calculated cognitive impairment. That was the case that taught me one truth. Sometimes the most dangerous threat isn't a stranger on the street. It's your own child, when they start seeing you as property. I set the file down and opened another. Case 22F, the Hollister case. 2 sisters forged their father's signature on a financial power of attorney document and sold the entire $2 million family ranch. Their father found out only when he was thrown out of the house on his 70th birthday. Then another file, and another. Faces kept appearing, people crushed by their own families. For a moment, I froze with my hand on the last file. In that instant, all I saw was Martha's eyes. She always told me not to be so suspicious. She believed in people. I believed in data, and data has never betrayed me. I closed the file, opened the safe. Inside were a small computer, an encrypted USB drive, and a thick stack of documents, over 300 pages. Cascade Preservation Trust. The trust was created 12 years ago, right after Martha's first surgery. When the doctor said she might not live another 5 years, I spent 6 months transferring every asset, 40 years of savings, stocks, property, reserve accounts into the trust. Not under my name, not under Daniel's, not under anyone's without strict conditions. The trustee was a firm in Eugene, Cascade Heritage Advisors. I acted as an anonymous donor, using only an accounting ID number. 4 people knew about this trust. Me, the firm's CEO, and Marcus Lowell, my attorney. No one else. To the outside world, and to Daniel, I appeared to have only my cabin, a modest pension, and an old pickup truck. No one knew I had $7.8 million sitting quietly inside Cascade Preservation Trust, growing steadily year after year. Daniel never asked. He didn't need to know, and honestly, he didn't care. I looked at the trust documents, brushing my hand over the first page, the line that read, "For preservation, for dignity, for protection." A decision I signed on a night Martha shivered with fever from chemotherapy. I placed the documents aside, opened my laptop, and logged into Deschutes security. I checked the camera system, lodge, house, yard, entryway. Everything functioning perfectly. Then I opened the browser and accessed Oregon's Public Medical Registry. I typed the name, Dr. Neil Crawford. No disciplinary records, no suspensions, just a handful of complaints in old medical reports. But I remembered his face from 2 previous cases. The type of doctor who helps children acquire mental capacity paperwork on their parents. I opened my brown leather notebook, took my pen, and wrote a fresh heading. Guardianship attempt, 72 hours timeline. Under it, I drew 4 lines, the exact model I presented at the Elder Financial Abuse Conference in 2012. 1. Isolate. Cut off friends, block communication, fabricate narratives of confusion. 2. Discredit. Spread stories of forgetting, create dangerous scenarios, invent negligence. 3. Commit. Force hospitalization or placement through a compliant doctor or false reports. 4. Seize assets, change property titles, alter wills, secure financial guardianship. I stared at the 4 lines for a long moment. It felt like I was watching Daniel and Vanessa standing squarely on steps 1 and 2, and the Hale family with their calm, practiced smiles, preparing to step onto step 3. I closed the notebook. Sometimes I wonder if I hadn't come from this line of work, if I hadn't seen the dark side of so many families that looked peaceful from the outside, would I have recognized all this as quickly? I don't know. But I do know one thing. I prepared my entire life for this moment. And the irony is, everything they plan to use against me is exactly what I've spent decades warning others to watch for. I shut the steel door, slid the wooden cabinet back into place, and stood alone in the quiet kitchen. Night falls fast in Bend. Moonlight spilled through the window, and the red dot on the lodge camera feed was still blinking. I whispered to myself, "All right, you want to play this way? Let's begin." There is one thing predators tend to do the same way, no matter the social class they come from. They always begin by making the prey feel alone. When I worked in internal investigations, we called it Stage 1, isolation. Not locking someone in a dark room or shutting a door, but tiny calculated actions repeated over and over until the victim's friends and familiar connections begin to fall away. And after the Easter dinner, those tiny actions started appearing with an alarming frequency. That night I tried calling an old friend, Tom, my fellow veteran. He usually picked up immediately. But 3 times in a row, my calls rang once and cut off. I texted him, "Tom, I need to see you. It's about Daniel." No reply. The next morning, I called Janet, Martha's neighbor of 20 years. The phone rang once and went silent. I called again. This time it said the line was busy. Coincidence? Possible. But 5 consecutive coincidences within 24 hours? No. At noon, when I logged into the home cameras from my phone, I saw the first thing that confirmed every suspicion I'd had. That afternoon, I deliberately stayed out in the backyard longer than usual, leaving my phone on the living room table. When I opened the camera feed on my laptop, I saw Vanessa standing in the middle of my kitchen. Vanessa standing in the middle of my kitchen. She didn't know the pinhole camera was mounted under the ceiling beam, nearly invisible. In the footage, she held my phone, the one I'd left inside when I stepped out to bring in firewood. She opened my contacts, scrolled through my messages, deleting missed calls, unread texts, every note of concern from my friends. She even opened the blocked contacts list and added 3 numbers, Tom, Janet, and the plumber I occasionally called for repairs. She did it while murmuring to herself, voice soft, but clear enough for the mic to capture. So he won't keep talking to these people. Less hassle. I watched that clip 3 times. Each time, I became more certain of one thing. Vanessa wasn't acting impulsively. This was someone who thought ahead, rehearsed, and carried it out as if it were her duty. I called Marcus Lowell. "You were right," I said. "Their first move, disconnect, cut communication." Marcus simply replied, "You keep logging everything. When we reach step 3, the court will need it." That afternoon, Daniel came by my house. He looked around as if he'd never stepped inside this cabin before, the house he grew up in. His back was stiff, his eyes avoiding mine. "Dad," Daniel said, standing at the doorway like a stranger, "I've been thinking, you living out here alone, what if something happens? You should let us have a spare key, just in case of emergencies." I looked at him. Daniel didn't even dare sit. He stood with his fingers laced together, like someone trying to lie and feel guilty about it, but still saying the words because Vanessa and the Hales had hammered them into him long enough. I smiled lightly. "I understand. Older folks need to prepare for bad situations, right? Fine." Daniel's shoulders eased. He thought I'd softened. "Do you have the spare? I'll take it." I walked into my office, opened the small drawer beside my desk. Inside were 2 keys, the real one and the mock one, a perfect duplicate except for a microchip the size of a grain of rice embedded inside. I took the mock key, walked back out, and placed it in Daniel's hand. "Here, keep it safe." Daniel smiled, faintly enough that if I weren't his father, I might not have noticed the way his breath let go afterward. And because part of me wanted to see how honest he could be, I added gently, "Thank you for looking out for me." Daniel lowered his head as if someone had struck the back of his neck with unexpected kindness. He stepped outside, glanced back once, then left. When the sound of his car disappeared down the pine-covered road, I went back into my office, opened my laptop, and accessed the GPS tracker. The device showed a green signal, meaning the mock key was moving. I zoomed in on the Bend map. The signal stopped at Riverbend Cafe, Vanessa's usual spot. I opened Bend Traffic Live Feed, the public camera system anyone in town could access. I'd used those systems countless times during 40 years of tracking financial suspects through urban movement data. Through the grainy traffic camera on Franklin Road, I saw Daniel sitting at an outdoor table. No sound, just images, but clear enough to see Vanessa pull out a chair, lace her fingers together, and look at him with a brightness that was too obvious. They talked tensely for a while. Daniel reached into his pocket, pulled out the key, and placed it on the table. Vanessa picked it up like it was a very expensive gift. I watched the green dot longer. At 1742, the dot began moving again, back toward my house. Not toward Daniel's place, not toward the Hale home, but toward the forest road that leads straight to my cabin, at the exact time I'd left the house to go to Tom's, and apologize for the missed calls. I stood in the office, hand resting on the desk. To an outsider, I would look like a 68-year-old man studying a map. Only I knew I was watching the first moments of a plan breaking and entering. The green dot left the main road. I checked the time. I knew Daniel thought I wasn't home. I knew Vanessa was testing whether the key would open my door. I knew the Hale family believed this step would happen quietly. But there was one thing they didn't know. Every single step they took, location, timestamp, direction, was being logged by the microchip I placed in the very thing they asked for with such moral-sounding concern. That evening, when the signal turned yellow, meaning the key was right at my front door, I exhaled softly. Not because I was scared, but because the first step of their dirty plan had officially begun. Isolation, cutting off, cutting out, removing my voice from the world, They thought I didn't see it. But when you've spent your entire life watching people who think they're clever, you learn one truth very clearly. They always start by turning off the lights around their victim and never realize that doing so only makes the light from the camera shine brighter. In the financial abuse cases targeting the elderly that I used to investigate, step 2 was always the filthiest step, making the victim look mentally incompetent. No drugs required, no threats. Just a few casual remarks in public, a few pieces of evidence crafted with finesse, and a handful of carefully staged situations. Do it long enough, consistently enough, and people will believe. Sometimes even the victim believes. Vanessa understood that better than anyone. 7 days after the first Easter dinner, Bend Community Lodge hosted the Family Spring Brunch, a gathering of more than 20 families in the area. The lodge hung yellow tulips. The buffet tables were set with waffles and fresh fruit, and kids ran around with candy baskets. It looked like the kind of atmosphere where disaster couldn't possibly enter. I came to observe. Vanessa came to perform. I had barely poured a glass of apple cider when her voice rose above the crowd. Clear, bright, perfectly pitched for the whole room to hear. Is Dad feeling okay? Yesterday, he mixed up the dates again. He even called me Martha. The lodge fell silent for a moment, short, but undeniably real. 20 heads turned toward me at the same time. That line, he called me Martha, wasn't just a lie. It was a blade driven straight into my oldest wound, into the name of the woman I had loved for 41 years. The one person I had never mistaken anyone for, and the one name I never used lightly. But Vanessa delivered it like fact, like evidence, like a gavel strike. I didn't react. I simply pressed my lips together, set the glass down, and let the pinhole cameras hidden in the lodge's beams record every face turning toward her as if listening to a red alert warning about my mental state. Vanessa continued, voice full of counterfeit concern. We're really worried about him. At his age, mixing things up happens a lot. And the other night, he left the garden hose running all night. I knew she was lying. I also knew she wanted her voice to carry. Grant Hale chimed in from the next table, his timing flawless, as though rehearsed. At that age, confusion hits fast. It's sad, really. Lorraine placed her hand on her chest, shaking her head in sympathetic disappointment. Daniel stood beside his wife, face a shade pale but still nodding as if Vanessa was stating something he'd witnessed with his own eyes. I looked at him for a long moment, waiting to see if he had the courage to correct even a tiny lie. He didn't. I turned to pick up a serving of pancetta, calm as if no one had just weaponized Martha's name against me. But the truth was, every cell in me was imprinting every sound, every glance, every one of Daniel's nods, turning each into evidence to use against my own son. That afternoon, Daniel appeared in my backyard holding his phone. Dad, let me record a little video of you gardening. I want to keep the memory. Memory? No. This was footage for a case file. I looked straight into the phone's lens. I saw the hesitation behind his eyes. The tug-of-war between wanting to please his wife and knowing what he was doing was wrong. But in the end, Daniel lifted the camera. Just do your thing, Dad. I did. I bent down to pull weeds, trimmed a few sprigs of lavender. Then I paused, bracing one hand on my knee, as if tired. Daniel moved in with the camera immediately. Dad? Dad, you okay? No, I said, keeping my pace slow. Sometimes I get lightheaded when I stand too fast. Daniel's face lit up, not out of concern, but because he thought he'd just captured a perfect piece of evidence for their Dad is Slipping collection. I intentionally acted. I intentionally breathed a little heavier. I intentionally forgot a line I just said. Not because I was weak, but because I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. Over the next 2 days, I forgot a few things when Daniel or Vanessa showed up. Forgot to turn off the stove after boiling water for tea. Forgot the key in the door for a minute before pulling it out. forgot a medical appointment date. Of course, I didn't really forget. I was simply performing the exact pattern I'd seen in countless victims, doubting themselves because predators had already planted the script. The cameras inside the house captured everything, and more importantly, they captured what I wanted them to capture. That I only forgot things when Daniel or Vanessa were present, yet when I was alone, I was sharp, not a single misstep. On the third night, I reviewed the footage from the lodge and from the house. One clip was unmistakable. Vanessa texting Daniel, "Make sure to get a shot of him bending too fast. Looks more like dizziness." Another clip showed Daniel sending her the gardening video. She replied, "Good. Tomorrow ask if he took his meds. Film that too." They didn't know that the living room camera recorded the moment Vanessa opened the messages and had the phone read them aloud with the text-to-speech feature, the audio feeding straight into the camera's mic. They had no idea the mic picked up every word with perfect clarity. They didn't realize they were directing the worst film of their lives, right in front of my lenses. That night, I drove to Deschutes' diner. Marcus Lowell was already there, laptop open. He said, "I reviewed today's logs. Vanessa's building your incompetency profile." "I know," I said. "They're on step 2. Marcus opened his checklist. Isolate, discredit, commit, seize assets. "All that's left is the step where you become a danger to yourself," he said. I turned my coffee cup slowly and replied, "They want me to be a danger to myself? Fine. I'll give them exactly what they want. But at the moment of my choosing..." Marcus stared at me for a while, then nodded, and I knew. The discrediting phase was just the prelude. The real performance hadn't even begun. That spring dinner wasn't my idea. Daniel called it a safety assessment meal, to see whether Dad can still manage on his own. I knew it was nothing more than an excuse for step 3 of their plan, manufacturing an unsafe incident to bolster an incompetency file. Bend Community Lodge that night was dressed in warm amber lights, wine-colored table linens, tulip centerpieces like a small, elegant banquet. 32 people were present, enough that anything happening in that room would travel across the entire town by sunrise. I stood near the open kitchen counter, pouring Oregon Pinot Noir into a row of glasses. The table behind me had been set too close. The chairs were wide and heavy. One step back and I was trapped, my back wedged against the tabletop, my foot caught on a chair rung. That tiny detail would later become the reason I couldn't move in time. Vanessa approached with a wine glass in hand, her smile sweet as honey, but her eyes fixed on me the way a predator watches an animal step into a snare. She glanced around, confirming the room's attention settling in our direction, then said loud enough for the entire lodge to hear, "You okay, Dad? Yesterday you forgot to turn the stove off again. Good thing we stopped by to check." Conversations died mid-sentence, the air stalling like someone had clamped a hand over the lodge's throat. Daniel stood beside his wife, face pale but still nodding as though he'd personally witnessed it. I set the bottle down, turned to respond, and that's when Vanessa's mouth twitched in a little smirk. What happened next took less than a second. She snapped her wrist, swung her entire arm forward, and hurled the wineglass straight at my face. I saw her wrist flick down the way someone skims a stone across a lake. Precise, practiced, intentional. The glass arced through the warm lodge light, the crimson wine swirling inside like blood under a microscope. I wanted to step back, I truly did, but my spine was pinned to the table, my legs jammed between 2 chair bars. I couldn't move, couldn't dodge. I managed to turn my head a fraction before... crash! The glass detonated against my right cheekbone. It didn't bounce. It didn't slide. It shattered on impact. That direct shatter carved a deep, clean line, about 2.5 inches, down my cheek, sharp enough to slice through skin, muscle, and nerve in one cold sweep. Wine exploded across my eye, my collar, my chin. Some of it was wine. The rest was my blood. Splinters of glass hit the floor with a brittle patter. 8 people screamed. Chairs scraped in a chaotic chorus as the rest of the lodge lurched to their feet. Vanessa widened her eyes in a performance of shock, but her hand was still frozen mid-throw, thumb and forefinger curled, not yet relaxed. Daniel stood like a statue, face drained, hands trembling but unwilling to touch me. I raised my fingers to my cheek. Heat, stickiness, thickness. When I pulled my hand away, it was soaked red. I didn't shout. I didn't panic. I didn't say a word to them. I simply dabbed the wound with a napkin, picked up my jacket, and calmly pulled out my phone to call an Uber to St. Charles Medical Center. No one dared stop me. No one dared explain. And not one of the 32 people present could pretend they didn't see. I looked Vanessa in the eyes, and in a single breath, I understood exactly why she did it. This wasn't anger. It wasn't an outburst. It was strategy. This was the fastest way for her to stage a perfect accident that made me look like an old man with slow reflexes, someone unable to protect himself. A dramatic, visible injury in front of 32 witnesses would become premium evidence for her incompetency narrative, opening a straight path for Dr. Crawford to intervene and eventually for them to seize authority over my house, my pension, and everything else I owned. Vanessa didn't throw the glass to hurt me. She threw it to create a legally admissible reason to strip my freedom from me. I walked past her. She stepped back half a pace, lips trembling, but her eyes still burning, not with remorse, but with frustration that I didn't play the victim loudly enough. When the lodge doors swung open, cold air slapped the open wound, stinging like a fresh cut under salt. I climbed into the Uber, shut the door, and felt the pulse of the wound throb with each beat of my heart. 5 minutes into the ride, I pulled out my phone, opened messages, and typed 4 words. Lowell. Phase 1 begins. The Uber stopped in front of St. Charles Medical Center at 7:42 p.m., the blue-white neon lights reflecting off puddles in the concrete like scattered shards of glass, making me feel as if I could still see fragments stuck to my skin. I walked into the emergency room, the familiar scent of antiseptic snapping me back into memories of dozens of investigations from my old career. The night shift nurse took one look at the gash on my cheek, didn't ask questions, and said exactly one sentence in that flat professional tone. "We need trauma room 3. Now." They had me inside in under a minute. The attending physician, Dr. Myers, examined the wound, then called for another nurse to prep the sutures. But before doing anything, she said the line I knew was coming. "We're taking photos. Standard protocol for assault." No request from me. No explanation needed. With a cut that deep, a shattered glass, and visible bloodstains on my collar, the hospital was obligated to initiate an assault case intake. The nurse photographed everything. The cheekbone, the laceration, the bruising around the jaw, the wine-stained jacket, even the patches of skin irritated by the alcohol. I sat still and let them do it. In moments like this, panic loses you the war. Calm wins it. After 8 sutures, Dr. Myers called the on-duty captain. 2 officers entered, Officer Manning and Officer Nichols. They asked the standard questions, and I told them everything, without emotion, without embellishment, just the truth. I described the distance between me and Vanessa, the trajectory of the glass, the angle of her wrist, the positioning of the tables that prevented me from stepping back, the number of witnesses, and the fact that it was clearly not an accident. The officers wrote non-stop. When Manning studied the wound, he let out a low exhale. This is consistent with a direct impact glass strike. Then he said the line I'd heard in 17 similar cases when I still worked in the field. "He is a victim. He can't go home tonight." I nodded. I knew. When a victim has just been assaulted in an environment where influence and further manipulation are likely, police protocol forbids sending them back to that location. Nichols asked, "Do you have anyone safe you can stay with for a few nights?" I answered, "I said, yes, my attorney." They didn't ask further. In legal circles, attorney is shorthand for secure location. I called Marcus Lowell. In under 10 minutes, he texted me an address, a discreet safe house on the outskirts of Bend. he used for clients fleeing domestic abuse. A small cabin, dark wood siding, a hidden driveway behind a row of trees. Not luxurious, not meant to be, but safe. I left the hospital after signing the discharge papers and receiving the full packet. Medical report, wound measurements, photos, physician's assessment, and the case number from the police. I paid with a cashier's check, a standard method in emergency treatment, clean documentation, unmistakably traceable. The officers escorted me to the exit. As I stepped into the cold night, a sharp gust hit the stitches and made me tilt my head slightly, but that was only the physical pain. My mind had never been clearer. On the drive to the safe house, I opened the lodge camera footage on my phone. The video was so sharp you could see Vanessa lowering her wrist just before throwing, like someone who had practiced the motion in a mirror. I saved the clip, made 2 backups, and sent it to Lowell. When I arrived, Marcus was already outside with a cup of hot coffee in hand. "Good," he said. "Lock the door. You're not going home tonight. The police put it in the file." I nodded and stepped inside the cabin. The night was silent, but across town, Vanessa was not. The home camera caught her coming back, face tight, entering my house with a key she wasn't supposed to have. She walked straight into the living room, dialing someone as she shut the door. Her voice came through clearly, clear enough for the camera mic to catch every word. "Dr. Crawford, I think he's unstable. He thinks I attacked him. We need a capacity evaluation as soon as possible." And in that single moment, I knew the entire war had shifted sides. Vanessa believed that glass she threw would be the evidence proving I was incompetent. But she didn't know it was the first piece of evidence I would use to destroy the entire Hale family. That night, while Ben sank into the cool bite of late spring, I sat inside a small wooden room, the storage space Marcus Lowell used for domestic abuse cases. Not a penthouse, not glamorous, not a glass-walled suite overlooking the city. Just a tight cabin room, pine walls, a folding steel table, an old leather chair, and an encrypted router on the floor. Nothing more. But safe enough for me to watch the thing I'd predicted for years. They were about to destroy themselves. I opened my laptop and pulled up the feeds from the house, the yard, and the living room. All 3 were live streaming. The stain from last night's lodge incident was still visible on the floor. Dark red wine I hadn't cleaned yet, spreading like a reminder that truth doesn't need help. It leaves marks on its own. 9:16 p.m. The door opened. Daniel walked in first. Vanessa followed, her voice sharpened into a hiss. "See? He hit the glass himself and blamed me," she snapped, dropping her bag so hard the camera gave a tiny shake. Daniel didn't answer. He just rubbed his head and muttered, "What do we do now? He went to the hospital." Vanessa flung her phone onto the sofa, her voice turning shrill. "I already talked to Dr. Crawford. He'll do a capacity evaluation as soon as possible. You just have to say exactly what I told you." I listened and logged every word. Marcus's safe house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the fan. Vanessa kept going. "Tomorrow you tell the doctor he's paranoid, suspicious, confused. Record the moments he forgets things, his words, his keys. You got it?" Daniel nodded, voice small, like a kid being scolded. "Okay, but the wine glass?" "Accident?" Vanessa cut him off. "Say it was an accident. Period." The camera automatically shifted to the kitchen doorway as 2 more figures walked in like they owned the place, Grant and Lorraine Hale, with the house key Daniel gave them. Grant clapped his hands once and declared, "That injury is good for the file. That's step 2 done." Lorraine straightened her collar, leaning against the counter like she was watching a theater performance. "When do we file?" Vanessa answered. "Tomorrow night. Petition for temporary guardianship. We'll report that he injured himself. Dr. Crawford will sign off." Daniel jumped in, voice trembling. "And the house?" Grant shot him a look of irritation. "That's my part. If you 2 get temporary control, that house goes under the Hale family. I sell a portion to cover Reno and keep the rest." Lorraine sighed, casual as if discussing a sale item. As long as the doctor says he's unaware and unsafe, the court signs immediately. I listened to every line, every pause, and what chilled me wasn't the words, it was the eyes. The camera captured everything. Grant smirking while talking about my home, Lorraine crossing her arms like she was choosing items off a clearance rack, Vanessa curling her lip on the word strip, Daniel nodding quietly, the nod of a man who lost his spine long ago. I zoomed in on each face. This is what abusers always forget. Cameras don't just record actions, they record character. 9:41 p.m., Vanessa grabbed a pen and paper and wrote out a list titled Fabricate Events. Dad forgot to lock the door. Dad spilled a candle. Dad talked to himself. Dad yelled in the morning. Dad forgot his medication. She wrote it, then handed it to Daniel. Say exactly this tomorrow. Daniel held the paper like it was an arrest warrant for his own father. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. Not from pain, but from confirmation. They had walked straight into the trap they thought they were setting for me. 9:56 p.m., a knock at the door. 3 knocks, firm, deliberate. The porch camera rotated automatically, revealing 2 police officers, Officer Manning and Officer Nichols. Vanessa's expression flipped instantly from snarling fox to trembling victim in under 2 seconds. Her voice quivered, eyes wide, hand on her chest. Oh, thank God. You're here because of him, right? He scared me. He attacked me first. She didn't get to finish. Officer Manning cut her off, voice cold as wind rolling down from Mount Hood. We are here because Mr. Harold Mercer is the victim of an assault, and we need to speak with every individual present at the lodge tonight. Daniel froze solid. Vanessa's mouth fell open, but no sound came out. Grant stepped back, his face draining of color, and I, sitting 5 miles away in a locked, silent safe house, watched the screen and thought, Phase 1 has begun, but not the phase they planned. On the second night since I left my house under police orders, the mock key with the GPS chip that Daniel carried finally triggered an abnormal signal. 10:23 p.m. The green dot blinked on my laptop screen inside the secure room. It wasn't moving along its usual path, not toward Daniel's house or the Hales, but turning straight toward my cabin. I wasn't afraid. When I saw the GPS marker enter my driveway, I felt strangely calm, as if everything was unfolding on the exact timetable I'd set. In fact, it was unfolding slower. Slower in the way a man who's handled more than 20 organized break-ins recognizes a pattern clicking into place. Marcus Lowell stood behind me, arms folded, eyes fixed on the satellite map. They're here, I said, right on schedule. Want me to call Officer Manning? Marcus asked. Not yet, I answered. We let this get big enough. 10:37 p.m., the porch camera captured the Hale family's black SUV pulling up. Daniel got out first, Vanessa behind him, and then Grant Hale with his wife. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the very mock key I'd given him 2 days earlier. He looked around, a clumsy, amateur glance for someone about to break into a home. Then he put the key into the lock. Click. The door opened. No resistance, no suspicion. Daniel smiled, small, satisfied, the smile of a man too naive to understand he just committed a felony on tape. From the safe room, I zoomed in on the lock. The evidence of unauthorized entry with a manipulated key couldn't be clearer. The living room camera picked up Vanessa whispering, Hurry, let's see where he hides the documents. They walked in. They didn't hesitate. They went straight upstairs to Martha's bedroom, a room Daniel had never once helped clean after his mother died, a room Vanessa always claimed she couldn't stand, yet now rushed into like it was hers. The overhead camera captured every movement. Vanessa ripped open drawers, flinging Martha's folded shirts like rags. Grant opened cabinets, tossing books onto the floor. Daniel pulled down Martha's keepsake box, spilling their wedding album across the carpet. Martha's nightgown, her handkerchiefs, old letters from 1984, all crushed under their feet. I watched without blinking. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because feelings don't win cases. Evidence does. 10:44 p.m., Vanessa found my small safe behind the framed picture on the wall. They knew its location. Clearly someone had done their homework. She knelt and entered a code. ZAC 203. Wrong. 0711. Wrong. 1125. Wrong. Stupid old man, she hissed. He changed the damn code. Grant stepped forward. Break it. Use the crowbar. In the garage. From the safe room, I turned to Marcus. Intent to steal, I said. Crystal clear. Marcus nodded. Now I call the police. Since they're actively attempting to breach a safe, that's grounds for exigent circumstances. Officers can enter immediately without a warrant. 10:49 p.m. The front door camera lit up with 2 flashlights. Officers Manning and Nichols. Marcus had worked fast enough to make me almost laugh. They stood at the door, hands on their weapons, preparing to enter. But I had one last thing to do. I opened the house intercom, something Daniel didn't know existed, installed back when I was still in investigations. I let 5 seconds of soft static fill the house, long enough to freeze every person inside. Vanessa jerked upright, face draining of color. When she heard my voice echo through the room, they were tearing apart. If you want to open the safe, let me help. All 4 of them froze like statues. I continued, each word sharp as metal on a table. The code is 0419, the birthday of the one person in that house you never respected. Martha, the only person in that home who deserved respect. The woman none of them were worthy of naming. On my laptop screen, I watched Vanessa step back, lips trembling. Daniel breaking into sweat. Grant cursing under his breath. Lorraine covering her mouth with both hands. And I simply pressed enter, sending the full live stream straight to Officer Manning's phone at the exact moment the police kicked the door in. That night, they didn't just break into my home. They broke the future they thought that they were entitled to. When the police breached my house under exigent circumstances, I left Lowell's safe room and was escorted to the scene by 2 detectives from the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office. No sirens, no theatrics, just 4 people stepping out of the vehicle. Me, Marcus Lowell, and Detectives Ramirez and Holloway. All silent, but silence sometimes frightens people more than sirens ever could. I walked into my own home through the front door. The officer's flashlight swept over the dried wine stain. Martha's photo album pages scattered on the floor, drawers ransacked, and the shoe prints of 4 people who thought I'd never return. Vanessa stood pressed against the wall, her face draining of color, when she saw me arrive with the detectives. Daniel collapsed into a chair, while Grant and Lorraine Hale were already ordered to remain still. Officer Manning turned to me and asked, "Mr. Mercer, would you like to present the file now?" I nodded. Now. Lowell opened his case. The evidence came out in the exact order I had gathered it across the last 72 hours, piece by piece, sharp as surgical steel. Time-stamped footage. Live streams from the lodge, the living room, and Martha's bedroom, showing every action, every timestamp, every location. Audio with full chain of custody. Vanessa reading her own incriminating messages aloud, captured by the microphone. Daniel receiving instructions to lie. Grant saying, "Break the safe." All stamped, all metadata verified, stored in 3 separate locations. The mock key GPS logs. Daniel's route from the Hale house to mine. The 21 minutes spent tearing apart Martha's room, and the jitter in the signal when he pocketed the key and ran. Detective Ramirez glanced at the log and let out a short, impressed laugh. A key with a GPS tracker, textbook clean. ER report, an officer report from St. Charles. The 2.5-inch laceration, multi-angle photos, the medical assessment stating, consistent with direct glass impact, the designation of Harold as the victim, and the recommendation to avoid home environment with aggressors. With every piece of evidence laid on the table, Vanessa stepped back another inch. When her own voice played, shrill, commanding Daniel, "Tomorrow you say exactly that. Tell them he's slipping." I saw her flinch like she'd been electrocuted. Grant tried to bluster. He set us up. This is his house. He planted the equipment. Detective Holloway cut him off, voice sharp as a blade. Every device here was lawfully registered, back when Mr. Mercer worked in investigations, and Mr. Mercer has full legal right to record inside his own home. Would you like to explain why Mr. Mercer's possessions are in your wife's bag, Mr. Hale? Lorraine froze, clutching her purse. Officer Nichols told her to open it. Inside were my watch, 2 old letters Martha kept, and a small silver ring box she had treasured since 1987. Lorraine sank to the floor, hands trembling, unable to produce a single coherent word. And right then, Daniel broke down, not out of fear, not out of guilt, but because of a truth I had kept from him for 10 years. He stared at the trust folder, shaking, eyes wide like someone who'd had the world ripped out from under him. Then he screamed, raw, ugly, wounded. Dad, you're not poor? Dad, he stammered, you're not poor? You let me think you were broke. You let me drown. You let me take on debt. You had money, and you didn't save me? The house went dead still. Vanessa looked at him with disgust, her instincts sharp enough to recognize Daniel had just confessed the real motive. Greed. I answered calmly, so calmly all 3 officers turned their heads toward me. I paid your debt, I said, 6 weeks ago. Daniel lurched up. No, you're lying. Lowell placed the bank document in front of him. A cashier's check confirming Daniel Hale's debt, paid in full, 6 weeks prior. Daniel collapsed into the chair as if his spine had snapped. Detective Holloway stepped forward, her tone decisive and final. Vanessa Hale, Grant Hale, Lorraine Hale, Daniel Hale, you are under arrest for breaking and entering, attempted theft, tampering with evidence, and elder abuse. 3 sets of handcuffs, clicked shut, sharp, metallic, absolute. Vanessa kept screaming, he faked everything. He set us up. He's delusional. Detective Ramirez replied, cameras don't fake. GPS doesn't lie. And an ER doctor doesn't fabricate a laceration on your father-in-law's face. I watched all 4 of them taken out of my house through the same door they had entered, when they thought I was weak, helpless, and easily handled. But none of them had understood one thing. The trap they thought they laid for me was the one I had already built around them. 7 months after the night they tore through my house, when Bend shifted from its golden summer light into the early cold breath of fall, the official trial, titled State of Oregon versus Hale Family, opened at the Deschutes County Courthouse. 7 months. Long enough for every piece of evidence to be sorted, analyzed, challenged, and verified, but also long enough for me to understand that justice never arrives late. It arrives at the exact speed required to strip every layer of deception bare. Courtroom 4 was packed wall to wall. The entire town of Bend knew about this guardianship fraud case. Everyone wanted to witness its ending. I sat in the front row, Marcus Lowell beside me. Daniel, Vanessa, Grant, and Lorraine Hale were brought in through 2 separate doors, each seated behind their own counsel. They didn't look at one another. They were no longer a family, just 4 individuals clinging to the thin hope that the court might believe their version of the story. But justice doesn't care about hope. Justice cares about evidence, and the evidence was so overwhelming that it could have overflowed the room if it hadn't been carefully curated. The prosecutor presented one by one. Full HD footage from the living room camera, the Martha bedroom camera, the porch cam, and the lodge feed, each one with intact metadata, clean timestamps, and angles clear enough to catch every tightening of Vanessa's jaw. Transcripts of every incriminating line. Vanessa ordering Daniel what to say, Grant telling them to break the safe, Lorraine discussing selling my home to pay their Reno debt. The ER medical chart, the 2.5-inch laceration, 8 stitches, the doctor's assessment of direct glass impact, the intake timeline, the multi-angle injury photos, and the officer's report confirming I was the victim. The guardianship fraud plan, Vanessa's handwritten list of fabricate events, the recordings of Daniel rehearsing Dad slipping, the footage of Vanessa deleting my contacts and reading my messages aloud, Vanessa's embezzlement file, over $38,000 siphoned from her former company in Salem, Grant and Lorraine's bankruptcy fraud, FBI records from Nevada documenting concealed assets and their outstanding $120,000 Reno debt. The judge went through every file, every piece, every line. Vanessa turned pale as blank paper. Daniel kept his head bowed, hands gripping his knees until his knuckles whitened. Grant pressed his lips together. Lorraine cried as if tears could rewrite federal records. But guilt doesn't wash away with tears. It stays in the record, and the court saw everything. Then it was my turn to take the witness stand. My voice was steady, no anger, no tremor. They didn't want to care for me, they wanted to control me, and they wanted my assets. I have seen many cases like this, but I never thought I'd live long enough to see my own son stand with the people trying to destroy his father. The courtroom fell silent. Daniel lifted his head, lips shaking. I'm sorry, Dad. I looked at him for a long moment. Then the judge read the sentences. Daniel Hale, 4 years in state prison for co-conspiracy in breaking and entering, fabrication of evidence, and elder abuse. Vanessa Hale, 7 years for assault, breaking and entering, tampering, and embezzlement. Grant and Lorraine Hale, transferred immediately to FBI Oregon and FBI Nevada on outstanding federal warrants, both cuffed on the spot. Vanessa screamed, "No, no, I was set up. He trapped us." The judge replied coldly, "Cameras do not set people up, Mrs. Hale." Daniel turned toward me one last time. For the first time in years, his eyes held real fear, not fear of losing property, but fear of losing his father. The judge asked, "Mr. Mercer, do you request the maximum sentence for defendant Daniel Hale?" The entire room looked at me. I could have said yes. I could have destroyed Daniel completely. But I wasn't in that courtroom for revenge. I was there to close the door. Slowly, clearly, I said, "I do not want the maximum sentence for my son. I want him to learn, not lose his future." Vanessa snapped her head toward Daniel, stunned that I still had any mercy left. But mercy is for the remorseful. She was not one of them. The trial ended at 4:18 p.m. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the autumn light lay across Bend in a soft golden sheet, over rooftops, pine crowns, and the stone walkway leading toward town. I returned to my cabin. The warm porch light spilled across the wooden steps, the light Martha used to call the light of a real home. I stood there for a long while, listening to the wind threading through the pines, and for the first time in many months, I felt my breath ease. Justice is not the sound of shouting. Justice is the moment you step back into your own home, knowing no one left in this world has the power to touch it again. 1 month after the trial, when Bend had already slipped into the cold edge of late fall, I sat in my small study overlooking the garden Martha tended for 30 years. Maple leaves covered the pathway, the wooden plaque carved with her name still held its color, and only I had grown older and quieter after everything. But out of wreckage, something good sometimes has to grow. I built the Martha Mercer Foundation for Elder Justice, a small fund, quiet, unadvertised, but entirely dedicated to helping older adults suffering family abuse, especially guardianship fraud cases I had seen far too many times. I put her name at the top, not to memorialize the sadness, but to remind myself that her kindness was the one thing left untouched after 7 months of storm. 3 weeks after the foundation opened, I received an email at 5:42 a.m. The sender was Mrs. Eleanor Bright, 82, living in Redmond, Oregon. Her handwriting was shaky, but every word sharp as a blade. "They say I'm no longer competent. They want to put me in a facility, but I still cook my own meals, sign my own papers, live on my own. I heard about you. Can you help me?" I read that email over and over. When Martha was alive, she always said, "Harold, everyone deserves protection, especially those who no longer have the strength to protect themselves." I replied at 6:03 a.m., "I will come to you with my team. No one has the right to strip your freedom if you are still capable." Simple, clear, uncompromising. That evening, when I returned home, there was a letter placed neatly in the mailbox on my porch, Daniel's handwriting. In the letter, he apologized, said he had been manipulated by Vanessa, said he regretted everything, said he hoped to earn forgiveness when he got out. I read it all, then folded it and placed it in the top drawer of the desk, where Martha once kept her dried flowers. I didn't reply, not because I cut him off, but because some conversations require time, not words. The next morning I went to the garden. The Bend air was cold, dew hanging on the early roses. I picked up the watering can, the one Martha chose because she said, "It pours as gently as soft rain." Water fell over each rose, glimmering under the sunlight like drops of clear glass. I watered every root, slowly, as if returning the peace this home had been robbed of for too long. A spring breeze moved through the pines, carrying the scent of damp soil, and something that reminded me of Martha, no longer painful, just calm. I stood in the middle of the garden, looking at the wooden house I had protected with everything I had left in me. No more shouting, no more watchful eyes. No one left who could walk into this place and claim I was no longer capable. And I spoke the sentence I know I will carry for the rest of my days. Kindness has limits, but dignity does not. If you've walked with me through this entire journey, from the dinner invitations lined with hidden motives, to the wine glass shattering across my cheek, to the trial that peeled back truths no father ever wants to see, then I want to say one simple thing. Thank you for staying to hear the story of an old man who protected his dignity until the very end. Not because I'm special, but because somewhere out there, maybe in your own family or a neighbor's or someone you know, there are older people being pushed to the margins, underestimated, exploited, judged simply because they stay quiet. If this story touched you even a little, if you've ever seen someone treated unfairly inside their own home, leave a "So I know you're here with me," and tell me, what city are you watching this from? Portland, Denver, Fresno, Atlanta, or somewhere farther? If you believe dignity should never be negotiated, hit follow so you don't miss the next story about justice inside the family. I appreciate every person who took the time to listen. I'll see you in the next story.